tank was on fire. Everyone had run. I should have run too, but my feet wouldn't take me. From Audie Murphy's post-war testimony, January 26, 1945, Holtzwihr, France, on top of a burning tank, alone, against 250 German soldiers. January 26, 1945, Holtzwihr, France. The winter was brutal. Snow had fallen. The ground had frozen solid. The forest was silent. This small village in the Alsace region found itself at the center of the fighting that morning. The American Third Army had been trying to push through this area for weeks. The Germans weren't giving ground. Lieutenant Audie Murphy was commanding B Company of the 19th Infantry Regiment. Murphy looked about 19. He was actually 20, but nobody would have believed it. He came from a small town in Texas, a farmer's son. He had grown up in real poverty and had grown up fast. When he first tried to enlist, they turned him away. Too young. He pushed. They took him. He had been fighting for 3 years now. 3 years had shown him a great deal. He'd seen Italy, southern France, the German border. He'd seen the men beside him disappear, and he was still standing. That morning, he was waiting on a forest track outside the village of Holtzwihr. He had about 40 men with him. Across the open ground, German forces were out there, and according to the intelligence reports, they were strong. Murphy raised his binoculars and looked into the trees. Something was moving.
The Battle of Holtzwihr took place at a critical point in the American push through Alsace-Lorraine. German forces had launched a counteroffensive in this sector as part of Operation Nordwind. The 19th Infantry Regiment found itself directly in the path of that counterattack. Murphy's company was facing enemy forces that significantly outnumbered them. German strength that day is estimated at between 250 and 300 men. Murphy had approximately 40.
The Germans came out of the forest. Infantry, but with tanks leading. 2 German tanks were moving forward slowly, with dozens of soldiers advancing between them. Murphy counted quickly. Too many. Far too many. He got on the radio to his commander. Tanks coming in. 2 tanks, infantry behind them. I'm counting. More than 100. The voice that came back was short. Pull back. Get into the trees. Murphy gave the order to withdraw. The men started running for the forest. But there was a problem. The M10 tank destroyer that had been supporting them was still out on the track. The German tanks were closing in, and the M10 took a hit before it could get clear. The crew bailed out and ran for the trees. The vehicle went up in flames. Murphy got into the forest. He counted his men. Everyone had made it back, but there were wounded. He got on the radio and called in artillery support. He gave the coordinates. The artillery opened up. The Germans slowed, but didn't stop. And Murphy looked at the burning tank. It was still on fire, but the .50 caliber heavy machine gun on top was still there. Could it still work? Maybe. The crew had gotten out fast. Maybe they'd left it loaded. Murphy stepped back out of the trees. Sergeant Brawley shouted after him, "Where are you going?" Murphy didn't answer.
The M10 tank destroyer was one of the primary American weapons used against German armor during the Second World War, but it was itself vulnerable to German artillery and tank fire. The 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun that Murphy used that day was capable of firing between 450 and 600 rounds per minute, an extremely effective weapon at close range. However, operating it from the top of a burning vehicle presented serious technical and physical risks. The fuel tank and onboard ammunition could have detonated at any moment.
When Murphy reached the burning tank, the heat hit him in the face. The vehicle was fully alight. The metal was glowing. Smoke was pouring in every direction, and the risk of explosion was real. But the machine gun was still in place, and the Germans were 50 meters away. Murphy climbed up. He got behind the gun. He took aim, and he opened fire. The first rounds landed among the German infantry. They scattered, hit the ground, broke their advance. Murphy kept firing. The radio was still around his neck. He could still talk to the men in the trees. He kept feeding artillery coordinates, each time a little closer, sometimes very close to his own position. Sergeant Brawley came over the radio. "Murphy, what's your situation?" Murphy's answer was short. "Still here. The tank could blow." "I know." Brawley didn't say anything more, because Murphy had already put the radio down and gone back to firing. The Germans had spotted him now. They could see the figure on top of the burning vehicle. They opened fire. Rounds were striking the tank's metal, ricocheting, spraying in every direction. Murphy didn't duck. He aimed, he fired, he aimed again, he fired again. The German infantry couldn't advance. Anyone who came forward went down. Murphy's position was giving him a clear field of fire over everything, and the machine gun kept talking without stopping, but the tank kept burning.
Murphy's tactical position that day carried both advantage and serious risk. The elevated platform gave him a wide field of view and an effective firing arc across the open ground. But being on top of the vehicle exposed him directly to enemy fire, and to the constant possibility that the M10's fuel and onboard ammunition would detonate beneath him. That Murphy accepted this risk knowingly is clear from his own post-war statements. The decision to call artillery coordinates in that close to his own position was a separate risk entirely.
10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Murphy was still on top of the tank. German forces made several attempts to push forward. Each time they were forced back. The combination of Murphy's fire and the artillery support was keeping them out of the village. But Murphy was no longer just fighting the Germans. The danger had grown. German snipers had started targeting him specifically. Rounds were hitting the tank from every direction. One grazed his leg. Murphy paused. He reached down. There was blood, but it wasn't deep. He kept firing. 45 minutes. Brawley came back over the radio. "Murphy, pull back. That's enough." Murphy answered, "Not yet." "Why not yet?" "Because they're still coming." 1 hour had passed. The German advance had stopped. Murphy's machine gun and the artillery working together had done what they needed to do. Across the open ground around the village, German forces were starting to pull back. Murphy let go of the gun. He looked at the tank. It was still burning. How it hadn't blown was difficult to understand. He climbed down. He walked toward the trees. His leg was bleeding. He didn't want to look at his hands. They were shaking. Brawley came running over. "You're hit." "I know," said Murphy. "Where are the men?"
The solo defense Murphy sustained that day lasted approximately 1 hour. German casualties during that period are estimated at between 50 and 80 men. Murphy called artillery in so close to his own position that some rounds landed within 30 meters of where he was standing. Post-war assessments identified that coordination as the single most critical factor in stopping the German advance. The leg wound Murphy sustained that day was the 5th combat wound he had received during the war.
The war wasn't over. Holtzwihr had been secured, but Alsace was still a battlefield. Murphy had his wound dressed and went back to his unit. The doctors told him to rest. He didn't listen, because his men were still out there and the fighting was still going. But something had shifted inside Murphy that day. He didn't notice it at the time. It would take years before he did. He had spent an hour on top of that tank, alone, on burning metal, in the middle of incoming fire, on a vehicle that could have detonated at any moment. And he had felt nothing. No fear, no panic, just the target and the fire. That was the thing that stayed with him most afterward. He told a journalist after the war, "Don't ask me what I felt that day. I felt nothing, and that frightens me. A person should feel something. I didn't." That sentence carries a great deal. The war had given Murphy things. It had given him courage, resilience, the instinct to survive. But it had taken things too. It had taken sleep, peace, the ability to feel ordinary. After the war, Murphy started having nightmares. Every night. For years. He couldn't sleep with the doors unlocked. He kept a weapon within reach at all times. He couldn't go into crowded places. The war was over, but not for Murphy.
Audie Murphy received a total of 33 American and Allied military decorations during the war. Among them were the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and 3 Purple Hearts. After the war, Murphy experienced severe symptoms of what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. At the time, this condition was neither recognized nor treated. Murphy later became one of the first public figures to speak openly about it, publicly advocating for veterans to receive psychological support. That particular courage was different from what he showed on the battlefield, but it required no less of him.
The war ended in May 1945. Murphy went home to Texas. He appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Films were made, interviews were given, ceremonies were held. America had taken him in as a hero. Murphy never liked any of it. He said in one interview, "What made me a hero? My friends did the same things. Most of them didn't come back. I did. That doesn't make me a hero." That sentence says everything about who he was. Murphy became an actor. He made films in Hollywood. He even played himself in one of them. But off-screen, he was always the same man. Quiet, turned inward, uncomfortable in his own skin. He was one of the first public figures to say openly that veterans needed psychological help. In the 1960s, that took real courage. It was seen as weakness. Murphy didn't care. "Every man who comes home from war carries a wound," he said once. "Some you can see, some you can't, but it's always there." That became one of the most important things he ever left behind.
Murphy's actions at Holtzwihr were described in his Medal of Honor citation as follows. He resisted alone for 1 hour against vastly superior enemy forces and enabled his unit to withdraw. That description was accurate, but incomplete, because Murphy hadn't simply held his ground. He had actively coordinated artillery fire that stopped the German advance entirely. Military historians continue to regard this as one of the most remarkable individual combat performances recorded anywhere on the Western Front during the Second World War.
Audie Murphy died in 1971. He was 46 years old, in a plane crash, on a fog-covered mountainside in Virginia. There were 6 others with him. Nobody survived. A man who had come from a small Texas town, made it back from the bloodiest war in history, and spent years fighting his own nightmares. And in the end, he went into the fog. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He had asked for a plain headstone, no different from any other veterans. That request says everything about him, the years after the war passed. Murphy kept talking about the nightmares. He kept saying that veterans needed help. Nobody fully listened, not while he was alive. After he died, they listened. The trauma he had spoken about so openly was officially recognized decades later. Today, post-traumatic stress disorder is a real diagnosis. There is treatment, there is support, and among the people who fought for that, Murphy's name is part of the story. Holtzwihr is a quiet French village today. Narrow streets, stone buildings, a still main square. Tourists rarely find their way there. The forest is still out there beyond the edge of town, growing a little larger every year. Nobody knows where that tank is now. It was probably scrapped long ago, broken down, melted, turned into something else entirely. But the man who stood on top of it that burning morning, and the 1 hour of quiet, deliberate fire that followed, that is still somewhere. Murphy himself never thought of it as anything extraordinary. "What else could I have done?" he said once. Maybe that is what real courage looks like. Not seeing another option, and not leaving.
Audie Murphy's legacy continues today in 2 distinct areas. The first is military history. The Battle of Holtzwihr remains one of the most thoroughly documented individual combat stories to come out of the Second World War. The second is veteran welfare. Murphy's public statements about post-traumatic stress represented a remarkably progressive position for his time. Today, a number of veteran support programs reference Murphy by name. His grave at Arlington receives thousands of visitors every year.